everyone. Welcome to the program. This is Sunday Politics, live on China's television. I am Sean Okimbaloye in Abuja. Before we get into our discussion for tonight, I think it's an opportunity for us to have a reminder. And tonight, on our Lest We Forget segment, politics or public office is not a birthright. The sacred duty to service to humanity. Public office is not a birthright, nor is it a means for personal aggrandizement. It is a sacred duty to serve the collective good. The great Franz Fanon once warned that each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill its duty, or betray it. Today, Nigeria stands at a crossroads where the ruling class has largely chosen betrayal over service, where prebendalism, this insatiable sense of entitlement to state resources, has eroded our democracy from within, while millions languish in poverty with inflation hitting 29.9%, unemployment rate about 33%, and the nation battles to ensure food security. The political elite remain preoccupied with self-serving power games, deploying the machinery of state for personal enrichment rather than national development. Governance has been reduced to a transactional theater where loyalty is brought and competence is secondary. Lest we forget, democracy is in peril when public service is no longer about the people but about political survival, when civil servants and public office holders become enablers of corruption rather than custodians of due process. In this moment, there is a need for a constant reminder of the essence of public office and public service, not only at the federal level, but in the state and at the local levels. Those who are not dedicated to delivering quality, diligent service to the people don't have any business in those offices. The citizens also need to be more active. It is no longer time for slumbering in holding your elected officials accountable. All hands must now be on deck. We must all be vigilant and ensure our nation succeeds, save it from the collapse by the actions of desperate and selfish politicians. Lest we forget, history does not absolve those who wield power irresponsibly. Leaders who manipulate state instruments for personal gains, who divert public funds while millions starve, who treat governance as an inheritance rather than a responsibility. These names will not be erased from the annals of our nation's history. The social contract demands that leadership prioritizes security, education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Yet the ruling class continue to squander resources while classrooms remain dilapidated, hospitals decay, and roads crumble, as over 40% of our people living below the poverty line and in abject poverty. It is unquestionable that the focus remains on the politicking than the policy. Lest we forget, leadership is a burden, not a banquet. Those who hold power today must remember they will be judged, not by their rhetoric, but by the impact of their governance on the lives of the ordinary people. And when the time comes, as it surely will be, history will record their deeds, whether for honor or for disgrace. We just wanted to remind everyone, lest we forget. Tonight, we begin our program with some stories about tensions in Osun State, where Governor Ademola Adeleke has imposed a 24-hour curfew on Ilobu, Ifon, and Osun communities following an escalation of violent clashes. This comes after an earlier 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew, which proved maybe ineffective in stemming the unrest. In a statement signed by the Commissioner for Information and Public Enlightenment, Kolakbo Alimi, the governor expressed deep concern over the renewed crisis, which has now spread beyond Ilobu and Ifon to Osun. At least 30 residents have been reportedly shot in violent clashes between Ifon and Ilobu communities, with multiple homes and businesses set ablaze. Women and children have been seen fleeing the affected areas as tensions continue to rise over a long-standing land dispute. The governor has held a joint security team meeting to enforce the curfew and restore normalcy, warning that strict measures will be taken against anyone violating the directive. Let me allow you to listen to what Governor Adeleke said.
Some people have lost their life. I just, my heart, affairs goes to to the family of the deceased, of who have lost their life during the communal crisis. Means they are so rest in perfect peace. A few minutes of calling the security meeting, emergency, we call it emergency meeting, and all of them, turn up to support peace in Osun State, because Osun State has been very, very peaceful. But there are some people, for one way or the other, they want to start trouble, especially in Ilobu and Ifo and Osun. So that is why we call this emergency meeting. Not even only those areas. We are talking about from everywhere in Osun State. So we must have that peace. And now, for what I've seen, and from their comment, and from their determination, they are ready to make sure that Osun is peaceful. The youth should not be used. Anybody that asks you to come out and start burning houses and let their children come out too, and do it first. They should not be used. Osun is peaceful. We are doing wonderful things in Osun State here, in terms of our 5-point agenda, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of education, in terms of health, and so on and so forth.
Governor Ademola Adeleke, in what is being a concerning situation in those warring communities. Well, let me take you to Rivers State, where perhaps we'll be dwelling on some of the situation in that Niger Delta, the South State. It was relieving perhaps for some Rivers residents today as a Rivers State governor. Siminalayi Fubara made perhaps his very first public appearance since the declaration of state of emergency in the state and his subsequent suspension from office. The governor was seen arriving for worship earlier today at the headquarters of the Salvation Ministry in GRA area of Port Harcourt. Governor Fubara attended the service with his chief of staff, Edisine, here earlier in the past week. Some Rivers elders claim that they've not heard from or not seen the governor since the suspension, sequel to the president's declaration. Fubara's family and his security team were said to have vacated government house in Port Harcourt. And there is yet another concerning incident on an oil facility in Rivers State, where the reports now of an explosion on Soku oil facility in Akukutoru local government area of Rivers State. But before we get to bring you and speak on this matter tonight, let's also, of course, look at an update on the outcome of the Supreme Court judgment on Rivers State, the Governor Siminalayi Fubara, and of course, some of the incidents relating to the state of emergency rule that has been declared. Of course, there has been a lot of reactions and debate over the declaration of the state of emergency by President Bola Tinubu and the suspension of the governor and some other elected public officers. In the past days, it's been a moment of high perusing of the Constitution to understand some of the issues that's been raised by the law. But a lot of people who have argued or put some of the blame either on the National Assembly, on the doorstep of President Bola Tinubu, have argued whether or not there is actual power residing in the corridors of either the National Assembly or in the executive. Tonight, we'll be hearing from my guests. But before we get to do that, let me allow you to see what the former President, Goodluck Jonathan, his reaction on the situation.
We're talking about building a society where no one is oppressed, as reflected in the top paragraph of our national anthem. As a former president and also from the Niger Delta, when the issue of suspending the governor came up, I think people call on me, oh, President Jonathan, oh, President Obasanjo, you should say something. The key actors in Nigeria, from executive to the legislature, locally, Senator Binta and others are here, and the judiciary, they know the correct thing to do. But they are refusing to do it. They are pretending to sleep. And waking such a person is extremely difficult because the person knows the right thing. A clear abuse of offices, clear abuse of power, clear abuse of privileges, cutting across from the three arms of government, from the executive to the parliament to the judiciary. For example, no businessman can bring his money to invest in a country where the judiciary is compromised. where a government functionary can dictate to judges what judgment they will give. No man brings his money to invest in that economy because we are taking a big risk.
Those words from the former President Goodluck Jonathan. Tonight, we dig further into that matter and the implications. I'm being joined by the President of the Nigerian Bar Association, Mr. Alpha Musigwe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you so much, President, for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting me.
I know there's been commentaries from the Nigerian Bar Association. A lot of senior lawyers have been weighing in on this matter in the middle of all of the conversation. But as soon as the National Assembly also played its own rule in the Section 305, subsection 5 of the Constitution, understanding of what really the president did was coming to light. But from the NBA's standpoint, how do you assess holistically the outcome of President Bola Tinubu's declaration of state of emergency in Rivers State?
I would like you to be specific. What do you mean by the outcome?
Yeah,
so that I know how to answer your question.
There is an administrator right now in place. There are those who say, okay, whatever that has happened with the president, there is a question mark on whether the president could suspend the governor. There is also those who are saying that in the manner in which the National Assembly voted, maybe there are also errors or loopholes in the manner in which they conducted themselves on the day.
Okay. I mean, I'll take them in segments. For us, first of all, the grounds for the declaration of a state of emergency in Rivers State were not in existence as at the time the president made the declaration. It is our view that the facts as presented did not justify a declaration of state of emergency. They did not meet the threshold or the facts and circumstances enumerated under Section 3.5, subsection 2. Now, the next segment is whether, assuming that as lawyers say, without conceding that the president was right in declaring a state of emergency, was he right in suspending the governor and his deputy as well as the House of Assembly? We also went on to say, and still insist, that that declaration too was unconstitutional, because Section 11.4 of the Constitution makes it clear that declaration of a state of emergency does not extend to power of the National Assembly to remove a governor. Now, if you know that under Section 305, subsection 5, the declaration by the president does not really become law until it is ratified by a resolution of the National Assembly. So you understand in what context Section 11.4 of the Constitution says that provided that the National Assembly does not have the power to remove the governor and his deputy. Now, the substance of this is, what is a state of emergency? State of emergency is merely a declaration that allows the government to take extra measures to deal with the situation, either war, breakdown, law of order, or any of the things enumerated in Section 305(2). So it could be abridgment of the fundamental rights of the people. It could lead to maybe government taking possession of people's homes or doing things that would ordinarily have been unconstitutional, but for the existence of a state of emergency. It does not extend to the dismantling of democratic structures in a state where a state of emergency has been declared. And it was on that basis that we also posited that if the act of the declaration itself was unconstitutional, that the ratification of the same by both chambers of the National Assembly cannot cure the defect. And if you go into it further, the Constitution has stated that the National Assembly, both chambers of the National Assembly shall by 2/3 majority ratify it. It means that for you to ensure that the constitutional provision has been adhered to, you must indicate the number of persons who attended the sittings and the number of persons who voted for, against, or who abstained from voting. So you can't cure that by a voice vote. So a voice vote falls short of the constitutional requirement, because by a voice vote, you're unable to know whether you have met the constitutional threshold for ratification. So the use of voice vote in both chambers also underscore the unconstitutionality of the whole action. So even that quote and unquote ratification by the National Assembly does not meet the constitutional muster, and it's itself unconstitutional.
Yeah, President, let me quickly take you up on a few issues here. And if you look at perhaps that those who are saying there's some emergency laws that are permitted giving an omnibus power to the president to do as he deems fit or necessary in the circumstance. And in fact, there are those who have read subsection 5 of 305 and subsection 6 and said, look, these are issues that are being raised, and when the president sees something as imminent danger, how do you describe imminent danger? But the question right here is that in exercise of the duties of the president, discretion is also being put in some of the clauses.
So there's discretion and there's objectivity. The president cannot wake up on the wrong side of his bed and feel, oh, I think there's breakdown of law and order in a state. I hereby declare a state of emergency. I hereby suspend the governor for 1 year. I suspend the sitting of the House of Assembly. I also appoint General this retired to take over. That would be a key on the Constitution.
On one hand, President. On one hand,
that discretion is not a discretion that is without checks and balances. It must be within the ambit of the law.
So on one hand, declaration of state of emergency, there isn't anything wrong with it, if it's right.
If it is right.
But suspension of...
can never be right. Under no circumstance will it be right. So they are democratically elected government, and no president has the power to suspend another democratically elected officer. If you look at section 188, or is it 188, I guess, of the Constitution, on how a governor of a state can cease to hold office, declaration of state of emergency is not one of the grounds.
So whatever President Tinubu did last week, Tuesday, is absolute and is done. Nothing can shake it.
I don't think that it will be right to say that nothing can shake it. It can be set aside by a court. And the president can also say, you know what, I realize that I made a mistake. I reverse it, even though it's been approved by the National Assembly. I think we don't need to go down this route.
Is it also fair on him for those who have described his action as undemocratic? Because there are those who say you do not have 100% picture of what the president is saying. He has security briefings, he's seeing a whole lot of things, he's being told this, he's being told that, and there are threats that are being made in the creeks to bring down the nation's mainstay of the economy. Would you have said that the president should have waited?
So when I hear that argument, I only say, what kind of briefing has he also been getting about Benue, Osun, Borno, Yobe, Katsina, Zamfara, Sokoto, where people have lost their lives, where there has been insurgency, terrorism? Is he only in Rivers? You just talked about Osun before we go to this interview segment. And if the president has heard this, can we have some credible things? And as far as I'm concerned, while I may not be privy to the briefing he has received, I can only point to the content, substance of his address, which only referred to two explosions, and the fact of the intractable political crisis between the governor and his godfather. So I'm allowed to look at these issues as presented by the president in his address in appraising whether the grounds for declaration of state of emergency exist. And an objective appraisal of the same comes out with a resounding no. Because at the end of the day, it was all about the governor not being able to settle the crisis after the court judgment, after not taking advice, not doing this, house not sitting. And even though I don't want to go questioning the narrative as contained in that address, the point is that the Rivers problem is being cured with a wrong solution, in my thinking. To me, it's like taking a sledgehammer to your head because of a headache. The measures being taken to address the Rivers problem are overreaching, are extensive, are undemocratic, and above all, unconstitutional.
I mean, you heard the arguments and the defense of Chief Lateef Fagbemi, the Attorney General of the Federation. For you, is that tenable?
Well, to the extent that the content of his argument was not contained in the president's address, I wouldn't want to comment on them. But the fell short came close, or more like accused the governor of being behind the violence. And I thought also, if that was so, and if the two explosions that led to the declaration of state of emergency were real ground for it, there was even no time for investigation. They happened within 24 hours. And within the 24 hours, the declaration of state of emergency had been done. How sure are we that whatever briefing the president received had been subjected to proper scrutiny and found to be true? What if somebody just did that to set the stage for the declaration. I mean, what if? So I think it was hasty, it was unjustified.
Would you say that the governor has been unfairly treated?
If a governor has been treated in a manner not contemplated by the Constitution, it would be right to say he's been unfairly treated. But I keep saying that the problem in Rivers State is political, and only a political solution can bring it to an end, not what we have at the moment.
But this is largely, or in part, a political solution. I mean, a political action that the president has taken.
And an extreme political action with legal consequences.
Let me ask you, I mean, the Constitution is just an item in the body of our laws, the ground norm, yes, be it. But there are also elements, or there are also laws in this country that people have cited in his argument to say it gives the president the power, and those laws have not been set aside.
I would like for people to quote those laws and refer me to them. But don't forget that Section 1 of the Constitution said that this Constitution shall be supreme, that any law inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution shall be null and void to the extent of the inconsistency. And if the Constitution has not given such express powers, and indeed has expressly precluded the National Assembly from removing a governor, then such a law we have found to be in existence must be unconstitutional, and should not be justification for the action that has taken place.
But this action is not novel in itself. We've seen it happen before in our polity.
I'm sure you're not referring to Obasanjo, because that's not a good example.
Well,
Jonathan declared state of emergency in Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa without touching the governance structure. That is a correct thing to do, because that is in accord with the provisions of the Constitution. I think people's mistake is to have a mindset of the Republican Constitution, 1963 Constitution, and bringing the same into light with the 1999 Constitution, which has no such provision. And when people also argue about martial law is in place where there's a military rule. And there's no military rule in Nigeria at the moment. So we must be able to separate these sentiments and look at the law as it is at the moment, not as it used to be, or as it may have been wrongly applied in the past.
So if there is a precedent in governance and in government policy, Obasanjo's situation was a bad example.
That would appear to be so. Jonathan's example is a correct example, is a constitutional example that ought to be followed at all times.
But in this moment that we are talking, we've seen the administrator going about his duty. But there are those who also will say, look, if they say, according to them, and accuse the president of being complicit in what they have described as unconstitutionality in his action, what about the National Assembly? And Mr. President, let me take our viewers to what the provision of the Constitution is on Section 305, which actually allows the National Assembly within 2 days of being in session to approve whatever the declaration of the president is, and within 10 days if they are not sitting. Well, it mentions how many, the votes that are needed to make that approval. In both chambers of the National Assembly, it provides that 2/3 is what has been provided for, 2/3. So if you look at it, there are 360 members in the House of Representatives. It means that the 2/3 will be 240. And in the Senate, approximately about 73 votes are needed to approve the decision of the president or the declaration of the state of emergency out of the 109 members in the red chambers. But there are those who have put a big question mark into the legislative procedures in the National Assembly. There are those who will say voice vote will never or should never have been used in any case. That apart from the attendance, it's supposed to be the number in the attendance, which is 240 out of whichever number of the lawmakers that will approve, and 73 or thereabout of the senators who are seated who would have voted just like you vote to review any portion of the Constitution as prescribed by the Constitution for 2/3. But let me allow you to review how the National Assembly members, the role they played. They said 243 members were in the House of Reps. The Senate also said they had a quorum, and in fact they had the 2/3.
Let me just say this. The attendance would only be relevant for purpose of ascertaining whether the minimum number of legislators in the requisite chambers were present. And for Senate, that would be 73. So if there were 68, 72 That means in no circumstance would it have been able to pass it. It didn't meet the minimum threshold for that business. For the House of Reps, that would be 240, right?
Yeah, 240 for the House of Reps.
That is for purpose of attendance. For purpose of voting, because not every person may have agreed, even though they were in attendance, you must take physical vote. Each person is voting, and you tallying the votes and announcing how many voted for, how many voted against, and how many abstained. Ayes have it does not mean that everybody shouted aye. But there may be a majority, but may still fall short of the total majority. You can't assume.
Do their rules allow for voice vote?
It cannot allow for voice vote. If it does, it will be unconstitutional because the Constitution has stated the number. The ayes have it may be on issue of on which side does it appear that majority lies. On issues bordering on the Constitution, you must tally the votes and show how many voted.
Is there any provision for legislative review for whatever National Assembly members do? Because the implication of the fault or the error in the approval of the National Assembly is that it leaves the decision of the approver, so to say, to nullity.
So Shego, I've had cause in the last few days to say that if the proclamation of a state of emergency is unconstitutional, the suspension is unconstitutional. No matter what ratification you get would also be unconstitutional. It would be like placing something on nothing. It's like hot air. The declaration has to be constitutional. The suspensions have to be constitutional for there to be something to ratify. So if you ratify, even if they did a proper vote and had a 2/3, but what they ratified did not meet constitutional threshold, they would have ratified nothing.
So, but the basis for all of this is unknown to law.
That's my belief. That's our belief at the Bar Association.
So, at the moment, Governor Simfubara should be acting as governor.
That's our belief. That's what we will and expect the president to do, to restore him back to power as having unconstitutionally removed him. And that's why we do not recognize that the sole administrator is a rightful person to occupy the government house in Rivers State, having been appointed unconstitutionally. Indeed, when I saw him taking an oath of office, I was wondering which oath he was taking, because he was taking an oath not known to the Constitution. The Constitution does not recognize an administrator.
But what do you do in this kind of situation as an association? Because it's an association that also acts like the conscience of the practice. So the question would be, if you find any of your members who are involved in what should guide naturally, because everyone swear to uphold the Constitution and bow to the Supreme Court when he or she is being called to the bar. And if any of such persons are found guilty or found wanting in those regards, what do you do to those members of yours?
Point is, when a member acts as a politician, as our rules of professional conduct does not apply or extend to him. That is the current state of our rules. Maybe an amendment will so make it that if you're a lawyer and your conduct brings the association to disrepute or amounts to infamous conduct, you can be disciplined. For at the moment, we must be acting in your capacity as a legal practitioner for the rules to apply to you. So unfortunately, if any member of association is found to have violated the law as pointed out, he cannot be tried for professional misconduct. And that is a great feeling on our law, because our law is still backward. There is need to bring it in sync with modern realities, where for being a lawyer, you can be disciplined for acts that are not directly connected with the practice of law.
What lesson do you think we could learn from this scenario that played out?
It shows us that there is need for us to play greater fidelity to our Constitution, to allow the Constitution to guide us, and not to allow politics to undermine the Constitution, because the whole world is watching, and the level of confidence people have in us will have a lot to do with our ability to adhere to our laws, and also for the interpretation of our laws to meet international standards.
Are we going to watch and allow what you have described to happen? Is there anything that could be done to our laws in this regard?
Our law in this regard is sufficient. It is the operators that are not abiding by the laws. So there are two different things. We don't have any gap in our law. It is our fidelity to the law.
But there is a big question. I mean, there are instances.
For example, do you mind reading Section 11?
Absolutely.
You fall into error.
Yeah.
People fall into error when they read Section 305 as if it is a standalone section.
Absolutely.
But you read especially Section 11.4.
Yeah.
Section 11.4 and Section 11 to make it clear that even in a state of emergency, the House of Assembly can still be making laws, while the National Assembly also makes laws. It's there, black and white.
No, but my question...
You may even read the proviso, just read it before. Proviso to Section 11 provided
that nothing in this section shall be construed as conferring on the National Assembly power to remove the governor or the deputy governor of the state from office.
Would you say that that is not clearly stated?
I think it's in English language. but the question I'm asking is that we saw what happened when the late, when our former president, Yaradua, died in office. There was a lacuna in our law, and there were efforts to fix it. And there are those who say there is a big, when this kind of situation happened, maybe we didn't learn a proper lesson when former President Obasanjo took this similar action. Now it's repeating itself, and there's a lot of criticism. The president, the government of Bola Tinubu have an explanation and a defense for it, but as lawyers, and for those who are lawmakers, is there anything that could be done to make Section 305 be more explicit?
I do not believe it is not explicit. I still believe that we deliberately refuse to apply it the way it is, reading with Section 11 and Section 188. And the Supreme Court lost the opportunity in the Daria case to make a pronouncement by striking out the case on a technical ground. The court showed if people go to, I've read that some persons have gone to court, maybe many more persons would go. I think the court should clear this down by making a definite pronouncement on it. Whether he agrees with me or agrees with the president or not, but let the court make a pronouncement.
Well, it can only be the Supreme Court interpreting this, isn't it?
Well, we only seem to think in Nigeria that until the Supreme Court says something, it's not law.
I'm saying that because if there's a conflict between whatever decision of the federal government and the state government, I'm imagining...
So it depends. That was the technicality that arose in the Daria case, when they went to court and the administrator went to withdraw the case. And they said, well, since the person, and you're the person that are challenging your stay in office. So if the proper parties go to court, and they should be able to get an interpretation. And because it is the usurper that occupies the government of Rivers State, and there's no attorney general in place in Rivers State, it will be tricky who can bring that action on behalf of Rivers State. So, but I'll leave that for the lawyers to figure it out. I'm not their counsel. I'm not a party in the case. So they will figure out how best to get the Supreme Court to hear the matter.
There is a proviso that was given in the amendment to the prayers on the floor of the National Assembly, where they say that in all of these, that the president should set up a committee for a political solution. Do you think that can also help in the circumstances?
That is what should have been done in the first place. It's a political
solution. But the president mentioned that all the parties involved ignored him.
No. I don't want to go into this, and permit me not to go. But I don't think people can ignore the president of the Federation if he had made the kind of effort needed to solve that problem.
Do you think he was not firm enough?
He could have given them marching orders. I think if he had been firmer, he wouldn't be lamenting.
Well, those who say he's firm on sinful Bara, he has suspended him.
Well, I may not say further about this. It takes two to tango. It has to be firm on all the parties to bring a solution.
On a final note, President, your association is not only pivotal in the role in our judicial system, and but especially in our body politic. A lot of people will believe that the NBA should be like the conscience of our society, and that's what the practice of law is actually, that it should be able to help as a compass and redirect when we are failing or where we're derailing. Do you have a feeling, because the kind of descriptions and commentaries that we hear based on the actions and the decision of the president appears to be describing as though we are derailing as a people? Do you have that sense, and perhaps where do we go from here?
I think we are derailing as a people. We are derailing as a people. People are losing hope in the ability of the executive to deliver good governance to the people, the welfare and security of the people. People are losing confidence in the legislature. People are losing confidence in the judiciary, and also by extension in the legal profession. And when we issue statements, people may say, what is your business? Why don't you allow politicians to play their politics? But I always remind them that, like Dante Alighieri was reported to have said, that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of moral crisis choose to maintain their neutrality. We have a dog in the fight. We have a dog in seeing that society is governed in accordance with law, that due process of law is observed. And in keeping with our motto, which is promoting the rule of law, we should have a voice. We will say it as we understand it and hoping that it will help in shaping policy. We're not part of the crisis, but at the end of the day, we're all part of the casualties of a society that is dysfunctional, is not run in accordance with the law. So we're all affected. And we'll do what we have to do, hoping that we'll be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Thank you. And I'm not perhaps thinking that you are inferring that said that lawyers are part of the major problems of this country. Well,
it will bury our head in the sand like an ostrich to pretend that we are not. Because most times, even when some bad decisions are taken, lawyers are the ones who give the legal advice. And
perhaps in the crisis we're talking about, major actors here.
I would not want to conjecture, but I would like to believe that lawyers were involved.
Mr. Afam Osigwe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, the President of the Nigerian Bar Association, thank you so much indeed for your time tonight.
Thank you so very much for having me.
We'll take a break, everyone. But when we return, our conversation will continue with a federal lawmaker, one of those who took part in the approval of the National Assembly in the state of emergency in Rivers State. We'll be back, everyone, to hear more on how, why, and how they deliver the approval of the SOE. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let's get back to the conversation. I'm being joined by a federal lawmaker representing Osun, the Solo Federal Constituency in the House of Representatives, Honorable Bashir Daudu. Is live for us. Thank you so much, Honorable, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
What an interesting week it's been. There are a lot of controversies also. And I mean, it's interesting what we are hearing, that there money's exchange hands for the votes. How much were you given?
I wasn't given any money.
But we heard that monies were being shared.
Well, I mean, that's a rumor. That's something that you will hear, here and there, but that doesn't mean it's a fact. I don't think, and I know I didn't receive any money. I don't think any member of the parliament received any money.
You don't know whether they do. Some of your colleagues did.
Well, not to my knowledge.
But were you persuaded in any case to vote, along a certain line?
There was no monetary persuasion. I think what was obvious was that if you follow the trajectory of what happened, this is about the procedure of proclamation of a state of emergency, and this is well spelled out. What the president did was that did the Gazette, sent the Gazette to the parliament, and the parliament considered the Gazette and voted on the Gazette. Interestingly enough, there were even amendments, and at the end of the day, it was approved. So you follow the procedure.
So the approval and the procedure, the legislative procedure is a big one here. What part does the rule of the House set out the procedure for voting?
Well, this is very clear, and I'm glad you're doing this because it's a teachable moment. A lot of Nigerians don't know how the House actually operates. When the House starts in a new term, there's an ad hoc committee to put together rules that guide the House for that particular term. So the House actually determines its own rules and determines the manner that it votes, and that's in section 60 of the Constitution.
Okay.
Yes.
No, of the Constitution that asks the House to be able to draft its own rules.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, please. Sir.
Yeah. So, what does that mean? I mean, I heard your the last person you interviewed, then we was talking about quorum. That was an issue that actually was raised by a member. Talk about rubber stamp. There was debate. Even a member challenged the issue of the quorum. And if you look at 54, what it says is that the presiding officer actually determines the quorum. Even it talks about 2/3. Every day in the House functions by voice vote. That's what we do almost every day. And by the way, there were opposition members there from the Labour Party as well as from the PDP. I didn't hear anybody say nay in that particular regard. And there was a reason for that. Just so for people to know, it doesn't mean that in the beginning that the 360 members were in agreement, but they were persuaded by the amendments. Look at the first amendment. It said that there's going to be eminent personalities that will look into the issue. The second amendment says that the National Assembly should take over the function of the State Assembly. And then you have the third one that says that the 6 months is not written in stone. So I think that was persuasive enough.
So, the question here is that the voting is actually prescribed by the Constitution, not by your own rules, because the Constitution is a ground norm. Right. You cannot have a rule or the House rule that supersedes so it's standard that the 2/3 vote has to stand. The question I'm asking is whether or not, because the Constitution does not say whether or not it should be by voice vote or by the counting or by electronic voting. But the question is, does your electronic voting system work?
That you actually make my point, because it says 2/3 of the voting.
Voting is different from on quorum. Yes. The quorum is a totally different.
Quorum is
when the law says, when the Constitution prescribes 2/3, and I'm going to read a portion of section. Even from section 4, subsection 4 of section 305, which says the governor of the state, with the sanction of a resolution supported by 2/3 majority of the House of Assembly, that is when the governor deems it fit that there is a need for state of emergency. But if you look at section subsection 5 of 305, it said a proclamation issued by, no, 6 now, sorry. A proclamation issued by the president under these sections that cease to have effect, A, if it is revoked by the president by instrument published by the official gazette of the government of the federation. If it affects the federation or any part thereof, and within 2 days within the National Assembly is in session, or within 10 days when the National Assembly is not in session, after its publication, there is no resolution supported by 2/3 majority of all the members of each of the House of the National Assembly approving the proclamation.
Yes, and that's exactly what happened, in the sense that the Speaker actually at the end announced that there were the total number of those who voted that participated in the exercise. So that particular section was also certified.
Participating in the exercise is different from the approval of the prayers.
The approval is about the voting.
So how do you identify those who approve and those who do not approve? That's because the constitutional provisions are if because the speaker said 243 members were present based on the register.
Yes.
Now.
240 was required. Yes, go ahead.
240 is required.
Yes.
But he mentioned and announced that 243 people, members who were present.
Yes.
When there were members, your colleagues, the likes of Honorable Fred Agbedi, raised an objection to say, look, we should consider this procedure and all of that. Right. So the question I'm asking is, participation is different from voting. I might be a member sitting in my chair in the House on the day and decide to abstain from, because there are portions, or there are different kind of voting. You can either vote yes, no, or abstain. So if I decide to abstain and you cannot get the number of votes, it doesn't amount to approval. That's what the question I'm asking. That should voice vote have ever been considered in this sense? Because the probity of this whole matter is in the number required by the Constitution.
The number was certified in the sense that if you have 243 people there, and then they said, if you support, say yes, and there was not even one dissent, either from a Labour Party member or a PDP member. It's hard to say that the 2/3 provision was not.
There were dissents.
No. I was in the hall. I didn't hear anybody. I didn't hear anybody say nay.
In the Senate,
I don't know whether you were there in the House. I was not in the Senate. In the House, nobody said nay. So I think that particular procedure was process was.
And you don't imagine that there are those who did not also agree, who abstained and did not say yes. Does that validate the vote?
No, we are not going to take to imagination that you are talking about. I'm talking about facts on the ground. I was in that hall. In that hall, yes.
Does the electronic voting system in the House, does it work? Because we spent a lot of money fixing it.
Yes. Yeah, the electronic voting works. Yes.
But you've been in the House now for almost 2 years. Has it been ever used?
Well, it depends on what we're doing in terms of the rule. I'll give you an example. When you look at last term, which we also had electronic voting, when we were going to elect the Speaker, it's different from what happened in this term, when we were going to elect the Speaker. So the rules are different. I think every day in our practice, we do voice voting. I don't think this particular situation...
So did you use voice voting to elect the presiding officers?
This time around?
Yeah.
No, it was not...
what kind of voting?
It was individual voting.
Yeah, individual voting. For something as less important as a constitutional provision for affirming a decision that will affect the entire state, and you think voice voting is adequate enough?
Yes, because that's exactly what happened. So you are going to say
if individual people voted,
yes,
individual members voted to elect the presiding officers, you don't think that individuals should have voted in this regard too?
If you look at last time in Ninth Assembly, it was not individual voting.
Have you participated in constitutional amendment?
Yes, in the Ninth Assembly.
In the Ninth Assembly.
Yes.
Has there been voice voting to approve any constitutional provision that has been reviewed?
No, that was done by electronic voting.
That's the point I'm making.
Yes.
This is also a constitutional
The point
provision.
I'm making is that it's also constitutional that the House is going to determine the way he operates on an everyday basis. That is the law of the land.
Which may not be in line with what the Constitution provides explicitly.
That will be your interpretation of.
No, that is the.
I'm not a lawyer.
The spirit and the letters of the Constitution.
I'm not a lawyer.
Which required voting and the 2/3 majority, and not talking about attendance.
That may be your interpretation of the Constitution, and I'm not a lawyer, by the way.
Honorable, do you think that? Do you feel it's a kind of way in the manner in which what you and your colleagues did in that voting process, maybe Nigerians have a certain feeling about how you and your colleagues comported yourselves in that process?
I think if the premise of the question is that the members of the House are not doing well by Nigerians, I think that is false and that is unacceptable. I think the House is a reflection of the Nigerian society. And I also don't think that the Nigerian democracy is a Jeffersonian democracy like you have in the US, and they have their problems. So we are going to do it in the way that is prescribed in the Constitution and our rules. But part of the challenge is that a lot of people outside don't know how the House or the Assembly works. But to say that Nigerians are not well served, I disagree with that, because more importantly, the proclamation was actually made stronger by the House. Because it's not the way it came to the House that it left the House. And by the way, a lot of folks are not even aware of that there were 3 amendments that were done to that proclamation. Like the first one is that there's going to be eminent personalities that are going to review this situation. And number 2, the House will take care of the function of oversight in the Assembly, which means that the administrator is going to be in coordination with the ad hoc committee of the House. And thirdly, if tomorrow the president feels that the situation has changed, he can revoke the proclamation. That wasn't there in the proclamation that came.
Well, Honorable, I'm drawing inference from the heavy criticism that have come into this process. If the president and the executive has received their own bashing, and the ones that have come to the doorstep of the National Assembly, when some Nigerians have criticized the role that you played and say, in the honors of our political history, or our legislative history, that perhaps they would have wanted you and your colleagues to rise up to the occasion better than you did. Do you think so?
I understand that premise, but the way I would look at it is to look at the outcome. It's really sad what is happening in Rivers State, especially for the people of Rivers State. And sometimes we lose track of that. When you look at what the president said, he's been actually paying attention for almost 14 months now, and he personally even intervened. And the trigger came from the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court actually said that there's no government in Rivers State. And after that, then you had all these bombings going on. The primary function of the presidency is the safety and security of Nigerians. So you will not expect, if you were president, to just sit down and look in that kind of situation. He had to take action, which was constitutionally supported. He did that by going to Gazette and going to the Assembly. And the Assembly approved what he did. So we need to look forward and see how the process is going to unfold.
Let me ask you, I'm more concerned about the legislative procedure. Okay. Do you think it was fair enough and transparent?
Yes, I think it was, considering the way our rules operate.
Could it have been better done?
Oh, there's always a place for improvement in any institution and any organization. But that's why I was saying that looking at it from outside is a little different. That's really the point I want to make. And it applies in other situations too that have happened recently. Folks are not aware that there are rules actually in the House, and sometimes you may not be happy with the rules.
Honorable, do you think that the decision of you and your colleagues could stand the test of a judicial review?
Well, that's for the courts to determine. I'm not a lawyer, and by the way, I'm also not the spokesperson for the House. But
No,
I know that,
but did you vote yes?
Yeah, of course I voted yes.
You supported it?
Yes, I supported it.
You wanted state of emergency to be declared?
Yes.
In Rivers State?
Yes, of course.
You think that the suspension of the governor was right?
I think it was right because I think the premise of that is that ideally you would deal with the governor. But if the governor is actually involved in the crisis, there's no place for the governor to be there if you are looking for resolution.
As a lawmaker, could you have removed a governor, a sitting governor, or suspended sitting governor? Under what law?
The Constitution provides for what the president has done.
Under what law?
What the president,
under what section?
What the Constitution provides for a state of emergency, and it's done that. What is unique in this particular situation is that who would the federal government deal with when the governor is compromised in this particular situation? So this is historically something that has been done that I think is acceptable so that the country can move forward.
It wasn't only the governor that was suspended. The deputy, was suspended. Every elected officials in the state were being suspended.
Right.
How would you feel if you were suspended by the president from acting or representing your people?
If my actions indicate that I should go through suspension, I think that will be acceptable.
I'm not talking about you and your colleagues suspending you from the House. I'm asking if the president unilaterally suspend you from representing the people of Oshodi Solo, federal constituency.
I think we have to look at the global picture. Not try to.
I'm asking whether or not it is lawful.
I'm also responding. I'm responding to.
Is it lawful for anybody? You were elected by your people, isn't it?
I'm sure you allow me.
Can another elected person remove you from office?
I'm sure you allow me to respond.
Please
to
go ahead, sir.
Yes. We are losing track of the global picture of this situation. And the president himself said that there are extraordinary circumstances. This is not something that happens every day. And I think we really need to get that clearly. What was about to happen was that the governor was about to be impeached. And then the militants were talking about violence and all these things that were going to create the chaos. The president cannot just sit down and watch and see everything go down the tubes. That would be actually irresponsible. So if you are talking about the issue of suspension, yes, in an ideal situation, the governor will not be suspended because even the governor can call for this state of emergency.
Can what has been described as illegality be used to cure a situation as that? Could there have been other means?
I like the way you put it, that illegality, but I don't see the illegality. What the president did was constitutional.
Did you hear what the former president Obasanjo, Goodluck Jonathan said?
He's a Nigerian and he's entitled.
Did you hear what the president?
He's a Nigerian and he's entitled to.
Did you hear what Professor Wole Soyinka said?
They are Nigerians.
Did you hear what a lot of the lawyers, eminent Nigerians, have said about the suspension of elected people within a state?
They are entitled to their personal opinion, and I am too entitled to my opinion. The way I feel about this situation was that it's almost 2 years that the governor has been there. And there's been a lot of distraction. The people of Rivers have not benefited from the government. And then the next thing you hear is that they are blowing up pipes. We know what how many barrels a day Nigeria was doing before. I think it would be irresponsible for the president not to act in that kind of situation. And I'm glad that he did.
On a final note,
yes,
with the benefit of hindsight, Honorable,
yes,
what do you think could have been done better in the circumstances that presented itself over the past 1 week?
I think you have to go back behind that, and it's actually a very good question if you look back, because I watch your program and I know that you are quite enlightened about this situation. When you face a situation that the governor faced, leaders, patriots, everybody came to try to intervene to help them to settle this situation. And they even went to the presidency and signed an agreement, and they couldn't still work it out. And according to the Supreme Court, they were operating like there was no government in Rivers State. I think that if I were the president of Nigeria, I would do exactly the same thing that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has done. Because the first thing is that just calm down the tension, status quo will be put at the burning bar, and then we'll look into how we're going to move forward.
Right. Honorable Basil Daudu, yes, is the honorable member representing Oshodi Solo, federal constituency in Lagos in the House of Representatives. Thanks so much indeed for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's our program tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm sure I'll see you next time. God bless Nigeria.